guys, it's Sophie. So, if you've watched any of my last two videos, you'll know that I'm splitting my reading for each month into my non-prize reading and my prize reading. So this is what I've read so far from the Jhalak prize. Just in case you don't know that you're new to the channel, I'm currently trying to read both the Women's Prize and the Jhalak prize. And depending on how it goes, I might add some Man Booker International in there. I'm really enjoying the prize reading. It's nice to be reading from a list and to have like a sense of accomplishment. I think it helps me read a bit more. But today we're going to be talking through 5 books that I've read from the long list so far. So the first one I have is The Address Book by Deirdre Mask. This is a non-fiction book that looks at what addresses do and the impact that your address has on your prospects in life, how it signifies things like class and race, the issues around lack of healthcare in addresses, and the political implications of naming and city planning. Love it! It's the kind of thing I would expect there to be a really good podcast series about. It just feels like niche enough, but with some really good stories in there. I really like how she kind of interprets lots, or adds in, not really interprets, but adds in lots of little stories that are tangential to address planning or city planning. It kind of reminds me of 99% Invisible, in the kind of stories that it tells. And I've never really thought about place names before to this level of detail. I would definitely recommend this one if you're interested in non-fiction. If you don't read a lot of non-fiction, this might be quite a good one to start with. But if you do already like podcasts, I think it gave me strong podcast vibes, and I definitely enjoyed that. I read it fairly quickly, considering it's a fairly big book. I found that it had different sections that touched on different things, and her way of telling stories to explain ideas I really enjoyed, so I would definitely recommend that one. The next one that I read is Poor by Caleb Femi. This is a poetry collection. I love that this prize has poetry, fiction and non-fiction within it. This is the first one that I read, and it's short poems and photography around an estate in North Peckham. It is really quite depressing. There's not an awful lot of joy in this book. The poems are very brutal, and they kind of focus on both the experience of the men, mostly black men, who are living there, but also the architectural violence of their surroundings and the lack of life, and the kind of way that the place is planned to reduce your access to things that are alive and feel hopeful. I think I probably read this too fast because I almost became a little bit overwhelmed and desensitized by the amount of sad things that were in these poems by the time I got to the end. But I do think they were good. I sometimes struggle with poetry in that it's either too simplistic and I'm or it is so overly complex I'm not quite sure I got it. But this very much it was very obvious what the purpose was while still being poetic, and the language still feeling like proper poetry. If there is such a thing as proper poetry, but I think you have to be okay with there being rage and heartbreaking things in here. There's some light bits too, it's not just entirely dark, but the overall theme is one of almost claustrophobia. Then next I have another non-fiction. This is Inferno by Catherine Cho, and this is so entirely in my wheelhouse. This is a story about a woman who becomes admitted involuntarily to a psychiatric hospital in the States following postpartum psychosis from the birth of her first baby. She was living in London with her partner, and they decided to do a trip to go and see their family in America when the baby was very young, because they were when are we going to be able to do it again? It's going to be easiest when it's young and it will just sleep all the time. And so they go on this trip, and we kind of have to uncover what happens to her through her experiences when she's very unwell. I thought this was really beautifully written, and as someone who's been inpatient a number of times, not for psychosis but been inpatient for other aspects of my mental health, the descriptions of the ward felt so astute. I very much felt like I had a really similar experience to mental hospital to this lady, despite the fact that where we were admitted was in different countries. So what I would say is, if you have mental illness, you might like this as a story that's sympathetically told, and she's a very intelligent writer. And if you haven't, I think this might be one of the best books I've read that speaks about what being inpatient in a psychiatric hospital is like. I read quite a lot of this out to Tom. He is a mental health support worker training to be a mental health nurse, and he could kind of recognise bits of it too. One of the aspects that I really liked, which was quite foreign for Tom, but felt very familiar to me, was that when you're unwell, you don't necessarily know who any of the people are in the ward. You know who the patients are, but everyone else is just a blur. You don't really know who the doctors are, who the nurses are, who support workers are, who social workers are, any of that. They're just people who are there to keep you inside. And the kind of disempowerment and confusion was something I just thought was absolutely spot on. So really, really liked this one. Definitely kind of up there on my memoirs about mental health that I own. I just, even though our diagnoses were very different, it transported me back to that moment in time. Then next I have Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendes. This is a book about a young man coming of age who lived in the Midlands in the UK and goes down to London to explore himself away from quite a repressive religious upbringing. And it's about just like queer expression of self. It is very explicit, like really explicit. I would just warn you for that. I wasn't expecting it to be as explicit. It's never felt like overblown, but it was very detailed. And it just kind of looks at this young man as he grows into himself, but in a way that felt very close. I definitely felt like this had less of an air of a debut than it did of someone who'd maybe written like 5 or 6 books already. It felt very polished, very together. The only thing that I would say is there's a bit at the very beginning of the book which is related to the main character's family back when they moved to the UK as part of the Windrush generation, and I wish there'd been a little bit more in the book to demarcate the relationships that were going on between that first chapter and the rest of the book, because I did find myself being a little bit confused about knowing whether or not they were actually connected, or whether it was a sample of what it might have been like for people coming through in the Windrush generation and what it looked like 3 generations later. That's my only criticism, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was quite a brave, like, colourful book, and if you want kind of a picture about London as well, I thought they did London really nicely. And the last book that I have read so far on the Jhalak Prize is The Mercies, another one that I loved. This prize is doing well so far. This is about a group of women living in a really isolated part of Norway, and a gigantic freak storm comes in and kills all of the men who are out fishing, which is the majority of the men in the village. And the women who are left in the village are left to fend for themselves. But as stories kind of come through of this place where women live by themselves without the influence of men, people begin to accuse them of witchcraft, and we see how the community is affected by this accusation. I really enjoyed this. I loved the sparseness of the sparseness of the setting, the kind of feminine ideals, but in a way that didn't feel like they were completely out of touch with what the society at the time would have expected. They felt realistic for that particular community of people, and I loved this one. When I posted this that I bought it, I had like 6 or 7 messages on Instagram saying, "Oh my god, you're gonna love it," and I absolutely did. So I still have quite a few books left to read on the Jhalak Prize. I have My Darling from the Lions, An Antiemetic for Homesickness, Are We Home Yet? And all 3 of those I have bought, they're on the way to me. Then I have The First Woman, Ari Desire, What's Left of Me Is Yours, and A More Perfect Union. So I've not gone through these quite as quick as the Women's Prize, and that's partly because I'd already read some of the Women's Prize books before the shortlist dropped, and also because I've been using my Audible credits for those books because I'm less excited to own them than I am the ones for the Jhalak Prize. But I'm still hopeful I'll get through them. The shortlist comes out on the 13th of April, so I doubt I'll have read the long list by then. But the winner's the 25th of May, so that feels fairly achievable. This has been a little bit of a short video because my camera's battery's been flashing at me since I started, but hopefully you've enjoyed hearing just a little bit about the books from the Jhalak Prize so far. If you have read any of these or this has inspired you to read any of these books, please do let me know in the comments down below, and I'll see you guys again soon in my next video. Bye!